Hello, I'm Czardus, and welcome back to the Chicago History Project. In last week's video, we looked at how the topography of the Chicago region was shaped by the Wisconsin Glacial period. Today, we are going to look at how Native Americans shaped the region and created trails that eventually would become some of the city's most well-known roadways. This episode is brought to you by Patreon supporter William Darcy. I am so excited about this project and grateful to William for helping to make this video possible. In starting this episode, it is important to note that the land that is now the metropolitan area of Chicago was originally held by Native Americans. The Forest Preserves of Cook County has taken steps to address the displacement and disenfranchisement of Native people and actions to redress these issues. As part of this, they created a land acknowledgement statement that I think is a nice lens through which to open our episode. It reads, "The Forest Preserves of Cook County acknowledges that we are on the lands of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, as well as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki peoples. As a land management agency, we acknowledge that we have played a role in shaping the histories of local Native Americans by acquiring this land. We also recognize, share, and celebrate their immemorial ties to this land. We commit ourselves to developing deeper partnerships that advocate for the progress, dignity, and humanity of the many diverse Native Americans who still live and practice their heritage and traditions on this land today." Northwestern University explains succinctly the purpose behind land acknowledgement statements. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. Northwestern's recognition that land acknowledgements are not limited to the past helps to address the issue that Native Americans are often an invisible minority in the Chicago region. Yet today there are more than 100,000 Native Americans, representing over 100 tribal nations living in the Chicago area. This is the third largest urban Native American population in the United States. So while we will be looking primarily at history today, it is important to note that Native people still have an important role in Chicago's legacy. As we move through this series on Chicago, we will be spending a lot of time looking at how modern developments reshaped the city, from reversing the Chicago River to turning swampland into roadways. However, the land that is now Chicago was being transformed by people long before European settlers arrived. A Baylor University study from 2011 found that areas in the northeastern United States were being modified for close to 1,000 years before European colonization. One such example is Native Americans creating hydrological systems, such as irrigation, to help with the production of corn. When Europeans arrived, they assumed these floodplains were naturally occurring and therefore did not record that Native people created this topography. It has not been until recently that researchers have been able to conclusively demonstrate that what was once recorded as naturally occurring features are actually the impact of the Native Americans. In Illinois, one of the most visible impacts of Native people on the topography of the earth are the creation of mounds. These mounds were created for various purposes, such as burying dead, ceremonial use, and the platforms for important structures. In downstate Collinsville, Illinois, there is the Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site, which covers roughly 3.5 square miles and includes 80 mounds. While the original name of the city located at these mounds is lost, it is thought to have existed from about 1050 to 1350 CE. At its height, it covered 6 square miles and had 120 mounds. It is thought that the population was between 14,000 and 18,000 people, making it even larger than London was at the time. Recent efforts in Chicago have worked to pay homage to the Native American tradition crafting mounds. In 2019, Native American artist Santiago Etz began working on a set of mounds to bookend the North Branch of the Chicago River and the Des Plaines River. The Poctocinto Serpent Twin Mound has already opened in Schiller Park, a suburb of Chicago, and the Coyle Mound is slated for Horner Park, a neighborhood in the far west side. This project is being supported by the American Indian Center, which is based in Chicago's Albany Park. The American Indian Center lobbied for the initial creation of the mounds and will serve as stewards of the project, helping to ensure that these mounds continue to be part of the community. The Schiller Park Mound was created using traditional methods, such as using baskets to move the soil, and contains soil from indigenous lands across the country. According to the American Indian Center, these mounds are the first to be built in North America by Native Americans in over 500 years. Upon completion of the Horner Park Mound, both mounds will serve as wayfinding, which is a traditional use of mounds for Native Americans. The creation of these mounds in the present is a reminder that Native Americans are an integral part of Chicago's past, present, and future. Next, let's talk about some of the specific cultures that lived or traveled through the Chicago area. Initially, the Mississippian culture was the predominant group throughout the Midwest. This civilization flourished from about 800 to 1600 CE, and its largest city was Cahokia, which we discussed earlier. In addition to burial mounds, they were a maize-based agricultural society, developed pottery, extensive trade networks, and a complex social structure. While there are no known Mississippian settlements in the Chicago area, they certainly would have traveled through the region as part of their Great Lakes trading routes. By the 17th century, some Algonquin tribes had settled in the area. The Algonquin peoples are one of the most populous Native American groups, defined as any tribes that speak Algonquin languages. Prior to European contact, most Algonquins were primarily hunting and fishing societies, but did supplement their diets with cultivation of corn, beans, and squash. We're going to hone in on a group called the Mascouten, though we do not know for sure what they called themselves, as there are many different variations on the name. The Mascouten lived in the southern Lake Michigan area, though we don't know the precise locations of their settlements. I think it is likely that as a hunting and fishing society, they would have spent quite a bit of time in the Chicago area even if they didn't have a settlement in the region itself. Then came the Beaver Wars. Following the arrival of Europeans in North America, primarily the French and Dutch, the European market's demand for furs significantly increased the Native American interest in trading furs. The French were trying to force their way into settling a colony in Quebec, and having met resistance from the Iroquois, the French formed an alliance with other tribes. The Dutch, in competition with the French, with their own colonies in New Jersey and Delaware, allied with the Iroquois, and in order for the Iroquois to have an advantage in the fur trade, the Dutch supplied them with guns. The Iroquois then used their advantage to push out their traditional enemies, including the Algonquins. Eventually, the fighting reached Michigan, and in 1641, the Iroquois massacred a Mascouten tribe. Other Mascouten people fled to Wisconsin and ultimately to the Mississippi River, where they found refuge with the Wee, who were also fleeing the Iroquois. Over the next few decades, the French became even more aggressive in their attempt to eradicate the Iroquois and ultimately forced some level of peace, which allowed the fur trade to grow further in the Great Lakes region, and by 1673, the Wee had settled near Chicago, with 2 villages along the Chicago River before the end of the century, each with over 150 homes. The Wee were a subgroup of the Miami, and the name Chicaquois comes from their language, meaning wild onion or leek. If you've liked this video, please leave a comment or consider becoming a Patreon supporter. This style of video takes a lot more work to produce, and the project as a whole is, quite frankly, a bit daunting. But with your support, I hope it will end up being great. Also, be sure to click to watch the video on the screen now. I'm sure you will enjoy it too.